Welcome to Drucker on the Dial, a show on management and leadership where timely issues meet timeless principles. Produced by the Drucker Institute at Claremont Graduate University. I'm your host, Phalana Tiller. As always on Drucker on the Dial, today we're going to hear from two great guests. Roger Martin, the Dean of the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, who's going to teach us what companies can learn from two unlikely places, the drafting table and the gridiron. And then James Quigley, the CEO of professional services giant Deloitte Touche Tohmatsu, whose new book explores how organizations align themselves for success. And as always, my guests' insights will be illuminated by the teachings of the late Peter Drucker, the author of 39 books and advisor to countless corporations, nonprofit groups, and government agencies. Peter Drucker, the man Businessweek said invented management. Welcome back to Drucker on the Dial, a show on management and leadership where timely issues meet timeless principles. First up is Roger Martin. Roger Martin has been the Dean of the Rotman School of Management since 1998. He's also the author of several books, including 2009's The Design of Business, Why Design Thinking is the Next Competitive Advantage, and this year's Fixing the Game, Bubbles, Crashes, and What Capitalism Can Learn from the NFL. Martin has been named among the world's top 50 management thinkers by the Times of London and serves on the boards of Thomson Reuters Corporation and Research in Motion. Martin's insights share some interesting parallels with the work of Peter Drucker in areas such as being willing to experiment and always keeping your customer at the center of your business. Welcome to Drucker on the Dial, Roger Martin. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Phalana, it's my pleasure. I am a huge Peter Drucker fan, so it's a pleasure to be on Drucker on the Dial.
So you have a new book out called Fixing the Game, Bubbles, Crashes, and What Capitalism Can Learn from the NFL. And I'd really love to talk to you about that book in just a minute. But I'd first like to ask you to just go back a little bit with us to your older book, The Design of Business, Why Design Thinking is the Next Competitive Advantage. And I sort of want to start with this on that book first, because we're always interested to see the relationship between past, present, and future, and continuity and change. And so we recognize that in design thinking, there's a real relationship, there's a real simpatico between some of his fundamental management values about customer being the central focus of any business, about the idea of failing fast and starting small. And so I'd love to hear what you have to say about where the old meets the new, where that sort of some of those Drucker principles meet the design thinking principles.
Sure. Well, I think your basic premise is absolutely right, and I think it is true that much management thinking can derive from what Drucker said for almost 100 years, because he said so many foundational things that we now stand on the shoulders of that giant in thinking. And so, yes, I think Peter would be simpatico with the customer focus in design of business, the notion that you need to think about the customer first and very holistically, not from a producer standpoint. One of the many things I very much liked about Peter Drucker is he thought not about what was convenient for the producer, the company, but what was absolutely necessary for the customer, and that should drive the company and everything it's about. And in the design of business, I say that as well. The other thing that I think Peter, if you were alive, would be simpatico with is the notion that management is not a completely analytical exercise. So in the book, I make a contrast between analytical thinking, which is using inductive and deductive logic to prove things before doing them, which for some things you can do when you're honing and refining something that you know well. You can hone and refine it with more analysis. But lots of management is about creating that which does not exist. So listening carefully to customers and hearing enough from the customers to think, you know what, there's something that they don't have that we could produce that they would like. Those things you can never prove in advance,
right?
And you have to try them. You have to for doing things like that, you can't try something that, if you will open you up to a below the waterline hit. So bet the entire corporation on that guess about what the consumer might want. But that doesn't mean you can't try a little bit of it and see, get the reaction, hone, improve, iterate, and the like. And that's very much the spirit of design thinking, to say, if you're ever going to create something new, that's what you have to do. You cannot do it by way of analysis, nor can you bet the entire company behind an idea like that, but you can still do it. And I think Peter Drucker would agree with that.
The idea that you sort of you start small and you experiment and you revise and improve, and you sort of do it when it's least costly to fail, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think companies just shoot themselves in the foot when they say it's got to be perfect or we're not going to go out into the market with it. Right. And so they research and develop and build pilot plants and produce and then they've got a $250 million investment in the product before they launch it, and then if it doesn't sell gigantic qualities immediately, they declare it to be a failure. And I think instead, if you do exactly what you said, which is to try, to iterate, to listen really carefully, and not fall in love with your first product idea, but say, oh, they like this aspect of it, here's how we can improve it. That's the key to success and more profitable success, I think.
Mm-hmm. And what's the history behind design thinking and its application to business? When did business start getting turned on to the design concepts?
Well, I guess there was this modern phase, which really started, I think, in about 2003, and there were conversations that I had with Tim Brown. I mean, there's also of IDEO fame, and David Kelly of Stanford and IDEO, where design had sort of, in business, had gone away from just the designing of products to the designing of services, to the designing of user experiences more broadly. Mm-hmm. And what some of us started to say is, well, it's not the thing that they teach in design schools, designing of a product. It's a way of thinking, mm-hmm. And that's when we started calling it design thinking, and that at least first happened for me in 2003, and then the movement kind of exploded from there. Bruce Nussbaum at Businessweek was a big proponent of it, and so I think it's about it's a 7 or 8 year old phenomenon. Though there were aspects of it before. I'm not saying that's the absolute start of it, but that's sure. Really when this more recent kind of infusion of it into the more the mainstream of business dialogue happened.
Yeah. Do you have any stories to share or examples of companies that you've either worked with or studied where you've seen this in action? Can you take us through any little stories or examples of the practice of this?
Sure. Well, a good friend of Peter's, A.G. Lafley at Procter & Gamble, when he took over as CEO, said, we're going to make this a more design-oriented company. And so I actually worked closely with him and a wonderful woman named Claudia Kochka, who was his first ever VP of Design, Innovation, and Strategy. And what A.G. realized is that while P&G was very inventive, it often invested internally before going out to the customer, and so we wanted to bring more of this sort of iterative experience to bear. And the other thing that I guess he and I and Claudia discovered together is that there's a problem to thinking you know your customers too well, and you don't necessarily listen with very, very open ears to things that are surprising about customers. Mm-hmm. They say, I know them so well they won't surprise me, so why should I worry about being surprised? So it's sort of self-sealing. And what he wanted them to do is get out of that mode of kind of thinking you know everything about the customer, but rather going out and hearing new things with an open mind. And I think that's really been transformational. I mean, Procter & Gamble over the last 10 years has doubled in size and increased market share in a bunch of businesses and the like. And a lot of that, I think, is attributable to this focus on deep user understanding, being more sort of somewhat more playful and open-ended in the sort of the brainstorming about how you can meet those customer needs, and more sort of fast prototyping and iteration rather than waiting until you've got it perfect. So I think P&G is a nice example of how you can really be transformational even in a very big company with design thinking.
Mm-hmm. We've been tracking design thinking a little bit here at the Institute, and in fact, we've been kind of experimenting with using it internally in some of our programs and some of our decision-making processes. Yeah, it's been really interesting. I've been enjoying it tremendously. And but one of the things that I've noted is that there's now this growing backlash, right? There's folks who are saying, well, this thing is just so hot, but it's not the cure-all. And I think we noted one blogger recently who said something like, "We need to stop this exciting new phenomenon before it kills its host." And I'm interested to know, what you make of that backlash against design thinking, and outside of what you think about that, then are there and where, if any, are the pitfalls of design thinking as applied to business? Where has it or where can it go wrong if it's not sort of?
Sure. Well, and I think one of the cool things is that one of the people who said it, design thinking is dead, is Bruce Nussbaum, who is a good friend and was one of the kind of originators of the movement. And he's just a very smart guy, and he's being a little bit provocative on that. But I think the people who say that, I think there's some absolute truth to what they say, which is that because it's become so hot, just like any management fad that's become hot, all sorts of people hop into it and start doing something that they say is design thinking, and it has nothing to do with what originators of the thought process ever had in mind, and it's viewed as a kind of a savior. If we just design think, every problem will go away. So I agree in that respect, and I guess I've been around for long enough now to see so many management trends. They have that effect often, which is they become so popular that everybody and their cousin supposedly does it. What I guess I think is, and I guess I've always been of this view, which is there are some attributes to the way you think that I think are more helpful than not. I've labeled them in the design of business design thinking. Lots of people use other definitions of design thinking, and I don't quibble with any definition particularly. But what I would argue is that I'm more convinced than I was, 8 years ago when I first started talking about this, when I gave my first speech on the subject, that the form of thinking that I describe, which requires a blend of analytical thinking, inductive and deductive logic, with abductive logic, right? The logic of what is operative, the logic of what should be, that's inductive and deductive, along with the logic of what might be, is an absolute necessity for an absolute prerequisite for innovation and the creation of new ideas. And so, in that respect, if that's my narrow definition of what I think design thinking is, I think it's as important as it ever was, and is more recognized than it ever was. Mm-hmm. If you say design thinking means you have to go out and kind of do ethnographic research and do brainstorming sessions and the things that some people say you sort of have to do, I'd say no. That's a more too doctrinaire view of design thinking. Right. As I say, Bruce is a provocateur on this subject, and I think has got a helpful perspective. And his perspective, again, he uses different words, but he and I have I have sympathy for one another's ideas. He's now promoting the notion of we have to have a creativity index. It's about teaching creativity. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not at all kind of dissimilar to my view of saying we simply have to we have to get sort of postmodern, I guess.
Right.
I think there was a modernist trend in management and management education that said more and more things are reducible to analysis, to quantitative analytical methods, and we just have to back away from that cliff. We've gotten too close to that cliff. We've got to back away and understand there is something called creativity, which is the generation of new ideas. We have to understand how they come about, by what process of thinking, in what culture or management structures, all of those things, or we will create this completely analytical business world that will be remarkably less effective than we can ever imagine it will be.
It's interesting. I feel like there's a kind of quiet parallel taking place in the world of education, particularly secondary and primary education, where there was a big push for a long time to kind of introduce business management practices and principles, where standardized testing and this kind of accountability conversation was taking place, and then now you're hearing a little bit more and more that, well, hang on, we also need to back away from that cliff. In fact, if we're not creating opportunities for young people to learn creativity, then we're basically going to create a society that will never innovate. Really, I mean,
I couldn't agree more. And to me, it's the fetish of measurement, right? There's this notion if you can't measure it, it isn't important. Mm-hmm. And what I argue is that everything that's unmeasurable is not unimportant, and everything that's measurable is not important. I believe that the world of education has become far too much about the manipulation of quantities. If you think about it, the modern education, our kids go to school and they get taught all sorts of mechanisms for manipulating quantities, all the way from the times table, very useful thing, got all the way up to statistics and learning about quantities and how to add them, subtract them, multiply them, regress them, all of those things. That's manipulation of quantities. But much of life is about the appreciation of qualities. Right? So when you think about who gets to be CEO, how do boards choose CEOs? Mm-hmm. I think they choose them, and I've been up close watching this for a long time, more on the basis of, can this person lead his or her management team? Do they want to work for him or her? Are they motivated? What's that about?
Right.
Qualities. It's about appreciation of qualities, being able to say the quality of this person's management style produces an output that we really like. Where are the numbers in that? You can't go to people and measure and say, do you like him? Did you like him 8 times, 9 times, 27 times? No. Right. And if you're going to be a good board, you have to be able to assess the qualities of your CEO candidates and decide which is the best one. Right. Where do people get trained in that anymore? Like I literally, where do they get trained? Mm-hmm. They get told, you better drop, frivolous subjects like art and English literature and poetry and all that crap as soon as possible, right? Right. That's where you learn. All that crap is where you'll learn all of your appreciation of qualities.
Right.
So yeah, I think we've got to go, buck the modernist tradition on that front too, or we'll produce the world that we're teaching for, right? Yeah. So if all of these people who can manipulate quantities go out into the world, what will they do? Right. Manipulate quantities, and then what will it take to get you ahead in that world is being really good at the manipulation of quantities, and what will the result be? A dreary, bland, nasty, brutish, and short life.
You remind me a lot of Drucker's idea about management as a liberal art, and that the two of them have to have a relationship. Management education has to draw from the liberal arts, and the liberal arts can also integrate management thinking. And as you talk, you remind me of that. this idea of Drucker's, where he was trying to reach executives and managers and leaders to help them improve their practice in a really tangible way. Like, his work isn't purely scholarly, and just looking at the breadth of your work, it's evident that it's not purely scholarly. It's about practice and actually being in the field. And when you think about changing behavior or helping leaders improve their practice, what would you say then is your formula or your recipe? What have you come to?
Well, I guess again, standing on the shoulders of one particular Claremont-based giant, it would be to view business as a liberal art. Yeah, in fact, I in some sense, I say when I'm done with the MBA program, I'd like to, try to create a liberal business undergraduate program.
Oh.
That really does kind of help students apply the sort of the gestalt of a liberal arts kind of education and training to the fabric of business, rather than right now we kind of force them to do that themselves, which I think is not bad, right? So you go to Swarthmore or Claremont, right, or Pomona, or one of your 5 Claremont colleges, and you go to someplace like that and take a liberal arts degree, and then the assumption is you can apply that to business, right, well. And I think some can, right? There's no question that some can. A.G. Lafley, who was a highly successful CEO and a devotee of Peters, went to Hamilton College, fine East Coast liberal arts, or upstate New York liberal arts college, and then figured out how to apply that to business. It's hard. Right. It's not an easy translation. I would, my goal would be to help people say, how do you take that way of thinking and way of being in the world, which at its best a liberal arts program will teach you a different way to be in the world, and take you a few more steps down the line than just saying, okay, go ahead, be a business person now, to say, here's how you can think about that in the context of business.
So now let's talk about your new book. I'm interested to understand how this new topic fits in. It's called Fixing the Game, Bubbles, Crashes, and What Capitalism Can Learn from the NFL. And I'm really interested to see how this new work came about and what the bridge is to your old work. How does this fit into your other fields of interest?
Well, here's how it fits. All of my work, if you really wanted to boil it down, is of one sort, which is what I try to take aim at are theories in the world of business that are very well established, that produce the opposite of what they're intended, but we stick with them. So in the design of business, the theory is you are a better manager if you are more scientific. Right. So better equals more scientific, more inductive, deductive, analytical logic. And what I try to demonstrate in that book is what that gets you is stultification and death. And so here's another way to think about it. It's a combination of that and abductive logic. In this case, I take aim at another theory, and that theory is that stock-based compensation aligns the interests of shareholders and management and helps with the proper goal of a company, which is to maximize shareholder value. And what I say about that theory is that does not maximize shareholder value. It does not, stock-based compensation does not align the interests of management and shareholders, and it creates less shareholder value and all sorts of bubbles and crashes along the way. So we need a new and different theory. So it's consistent in that way, which says there are these theories that just become ingrained, and they're just they don't stand up to scrutiny if you scrutinize them carefully enough. So in this case, and I wrote a precursor article called The Age of Customer Capitalism, that the sort of HBR article is, the book is essentially an exposition of that says, rather than maximizing shareholder value, you should have as a goal to maximize customer delight. And if you do that, kind of guess what, you will actually have as an output of that having shareholders do really well. But if instead you say, I'm all about maximizing shareholder value, then you're less likely to take care of customers the way you need to take care of customers for shareholder value to be increased, if not maximized.
Right.
So it is Drucker-esque in that sense.
And so I'd be remiss to not ask you what you think about the tense labor situation that's kind of taking place in the NFL, as you know, given that that's your example here in this book. What do you think about that whole situation, and who do you think is right, if anyone?
Well, I guess I think over time the NFL and the Players Union have on at least two previous occasions had to go to the point of strike and games being canceled or replacement players playing, so that the NFL is by far and away the most successful sport in America and arguably the world from an economic standpoint. Even though it seems to go through this periodically. So, I don't think this is what's happening now is unusual. I personally think they're gonna settle it and have the season. And the question for me is, will the NFL? What I praise the NFL for is it's kept a laser-like focus on the fan and the fan experience, and that's why it's doing so great, I would argue. And they have a sensible policy towards compensation of their players, right? Which is, it's all about what you do on the field, not, and it's kept completely separate from betting on NFL football. Whereas for managers, we mix what you do on the real field, which is how you run your company really, combining that with what people's expectations are about your company, which is the stock market. I think this will all work out fine, and the NFL will continue to delight its fans first and foremost, and the owners will continue to see their franchises be worth more.
Right. Well, it has been absolutely delightful for me to have you here on Drucker on the Dial today, Roger Martin. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. It was great to talk to you.
Great. Thank you. Take good care.
Okay, take care.
Our next guest today is James Quigley, the CEO of Deloitte Touche Tohmatsu Limited, and co-author of the new book, As One, Individual Action, Collective Power. The book, which is based on extensive research by Deloitte, suggests that there are 8 basic structures that organizations use to spur collective action. Some of them more collaborative, some of them more directive. What's most striking about the analysis, perhaps, is that Quigley and his co-author, Mehrdad Bagai, don't favor one particular approach over the other. Rather, as Quigley has said, multiple models within a single organization will perhaps be most effective. In fact, he explained many of the highest performing companies in the world actually shift between and among these different modes, sometimes from top down, other times from bottom up. Peter Drucker didn't care much for the term bottom up, if only for aesthetic reasons, as he once put it. But he would have very much appreciated the concept of using multiple models to get the most out of people. Individuals will have to learn to work at one and the same time in different organizational structures, Drucker wrote in a 1998 Forbes article. For one task, they'll work in a team. For another task, they'll have to work in a command and control structure. Think of it this way. The executive of the future will require a toolbox full of organizational structures, Drucker added. He'll have to select the right tool for each specific task. Welcome to Drucker on the Dial. James?
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you.
Could you just tell me about the concept of As One? What is that all about?
What we've done with our book and its very simple title, As One, is we've tried to distill that timeless leadership challenge of how does a leader bring together a large group of diverse individuals and create an environment for them to work together effectively to accomplish some common goals. That's a lot of words. But I tried to distill that down to as one behavior. How does Jim Quigley obtain as one behavior from the 175,000 professionals that we have as part of Deloitte?
Mm-hmm. And as mentioned earlier, Drucker himself advocated that as a leader or an organization at any time had to be prepared to use multiple models. Do you have any examples of companies that you could say are, or not necessarily companies, but organizations or settings where you've seen multiple models used effectively?
Absolutely. And one of the references that I would make would be John Chambers at Cisco was proud of describing the innovation process at Cisco is developed and is actually operated very much in a producer and creative team kind of mode. In other words, it isn't hierarchical. It is very collaborative and very innovative, and ideas are coming to the table, and everyone is working to try to develop a solution that will deliver value in the marketplace. And then he quickly emphasizes, but after we design a product that we want to take to market and we commit capital to take it to market, we're going to go to market with very clear lines of authority and responsibility and clear accountability, and we'll go to market in a general and soldiers kind of way, even though the innovation process occurred using our archetype of producer and creative team.
So sort of every task has its, its requirements, and you have to be sort of flexible and prepared to switch modes as needed.
Absolutely. And another example that I like to use is the whole notion of conductor and orchestra when it comes to being highly directive for some micro or sub-tasks. If I were responsible for the compliance activities at a financial services enterprise, and compliance and a compliance failure was a huge problem for the brand and for the permission to operate, I would run in a highly directive way my compliance activities. And I might, in fact, use the conductor and orchestra archetype as a way to drive that discipline and drive that Six Sigma performance related to compliance with those particular micro tasks.
And I gather that this tool, this series of metaphors, was developed to look at organizations in general. But I'd be curious to know how your organization, how Deloitte has maybe internally responded to this concept. Have you put any of this to work, or have you had discussions around this internally? I think I read somewhere that you did some surveying internally and were sort of surprised by some of those results. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
We absolutely have taken our As One diagnostic and used it to help us become more effective at implementing our strategy. And what the diagnostic does is it gives the leader the opportunity to really truly understand what his team is thinking as it relates to key elements of the strategy. And so as part of our strategy refresh at Deloitte, I used our As One diagnostic to be able to assess key elements of the strategy that were important to me and that I wanted us to see us be able to elevate our performance and our commitment and our execution. And so to understand where on those key elements my partners lined up with in terms of absolutely committed versus supportive versus unaware or versus not supportive.
How did it turn out?
Well, what happens for me, I'm a client service maniac. I mean, I'm really focused on client service, and so I just assumed, which is one of the problems that I think a leader can have, you assume that everybody views client service exactly the same way you do. And so when I went forward with my directional intensity question that was intended to give me some assessment of how aligned are we and how committed are we to execution. And I asked, are we committed to deliver the Deloitte client promise in a borderless fashion every time on each client engagement? And I was expecting that 98% of my partners are going to say, absolutely, we're committed to that. But what you actually discover when you look at the results and understand how your partners are really thinking, maybe only 45% identify themselves as absolutely committed. Maybe another 25% are going to say we're supportive.
Wow.
Another portion might say they're undecided. But understanding and informing the leader of where the team is with respect to some edgy, challenging, strategic questions you can put forward absolutely informs the strategy implementation process. And my view elevates the effectiveness of the leader in their ability to execute strategy, to understand where the team really is.
You mentioned that some situations call for the top-down command and control management, and I think for most people today that they sort of have a knee-jerk reaction to that idea. They frown upon it, especially in the day of the knowledge worker. I mean, it just sort of doesn't seem very 21st century, right? But what situations would you say then that does work best in? When do you have to have that general and soldier model?
Well, as I said before, I believe with respect to compliance activities in a regulated environment, having Six Sigma performance is essential to preservation of the brand and the right to do business. And large numbers of compliance deviations or compliance failures will absolutely impair the ability of the enterprise to be successful. And so to be highly directive related to selected compliance activities, when you think of a highly regulated industry or one where safety is so essential, having high levels of compliance are essential.
Right.
The other way that I like to illustrate that when I'm using the art of exaggeration in a highly simplified fashion is if the fire alarm sounds, I don't want someone to try to use social media to decide should we use the stairs or the elevator. I want the fire marshal on this floor to clear this floor, and I want this floor cleared in a highly directive way. And I want people to go to the area that's been designated for assembling.
Why do you think people are so reflexively against that model, though? I mean, I feel like time and again I hear that that's sort of the least favorite model that people like to work in. What do you think that's about?
Well, I think that we all like to feel that we control our own destiny, and we like to, be our own person, and we don't necessarily want to feel that we are robots being asked to comply with highly directed instructions that we might receive. And what we believe is that there are absolutely instances where a directive model is both needed and most effective. But we don't believe that a one-size-fits-all, so that if, as a leader, you have a fundamental directive style as part of your core, there will be times when you're not going to be able to get the very best out of your team, where you're going to want to use a collaborative, democratic kind of process. And I think it's best illustrated when you think about innovation, and you're trying to get many ideas to the table, and you're trying to challenge the fundamental way in which business is being done. Many are fond of saying that each business is perfectly structured to deliver the results it's delivering. But if you actually want to bend that growth curve, or you want to move the performance to a new level, you need to do some things differently. And in order to then be able to be innovative about the approach that you're going to take to management or to leadership or to fundamentally operating the business or doing performance management with respect to your professionals, you need to be able to allow new ideas to come to the table. And the best way to get those new ideas to the table is through a collaborative, participative, very democratic kind of process.
Do you have a default mode?
I default to architects and builders. I like to lead with the power of ideas, and I like to put forward bold and ambitious plans and objectives, and then I like to empower my team to actually work together to use their skills, their ability, and then elevate their individual performance to work towards some ambitious goals and objectives. And bringing forward in an architect and builder kind of mode works well for me. I think that's a great way for a leader to be able to try to pull his organization. And I also like to use the metaphor of freedom within a frame when you talk about that. I'm a values-based leader, and I use values to form the frame that we operate within.
Tell me a little bit, Jim, about the research process for the book. I mean, I understand it wasn't just based on gathering casual observations of Deloitte clients and so forth, although I'm sure that would be a pretty rich source. I think that there was actually a pretty complex research process. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Absolutely. The way that we conducted the research is we looked at examples initially of collective action was the language that we were using as we started the research. What are some of examples of effective collective action that we've seen either in history, in science, in business, and what can we learn from what was required to be able to obtain effective collective action from a large group of people? And then as we got into the business case studies and we looked at 60 individual case studies that we believed illustrated effective collective leadership or collective action inside that enterprise. And then we looked at about 100 attributes for each of those case studies. And then we used data analytics and self-organizing maps to create these 8 archetypes that we have described in the book, and then illustrated through the book with each of the elements that are needed to have in place in order for that model to be most effective. And this was about a 2-year research project, and we had, over the course of the 2 years, we had about 30 professionals that were part of the team.
Wow.
And we ran the research effort as a series of 90-day sprints. Mm-hmm. And so it was done in a serial fashion with 3 to 5 professionals in each of those 90-day teams.
Were there any big surprises to you through this process? Was there something unexpected that you learned through this project?
One of the things that I was delighted with, frankly, was that leadership and the ability to obtain as one behavior or effectively exercise collective leadership is dramatically more complicated and nuanced than simply a binary mode, which I believe much of the business leadership literature articulates. It is a command and control, or collaboration, is how many books have been written. And I think that it's much more complicated than that and much more nuanced, and thus our 8 models.
It's such an interesting idea, and they all sort of resonate for me as I look through the book about different times and places where I've either led in a certain way or been led in a certain way. But I have to say, I also think it's a really attractive book.
Now, we do like the look and feel, and we are proud of the design.
It's beautiful.
And we also believe we've got some new ideas with respect to collective leadership and this timeless leadership challenge of how does a leader bring together a large group of diverse individuals, create an environment, and cause them to work together effectively to accomplish some common goals. The timeless leadership challenge.
Well, congratulations on this book, Jim, and thank you so very much for joining us today on Drucker on the Dial. We really appreciate it.
Great to be with you today.
Okay, take care. And now, Rick Wartzman, the Drucker Institute's executive director, with an excerpt from his biweekly column, The Drucker Difference.
When Cisco Systems chief executive John Chambers told employees in April that the networking equipment maker had lost its focus, it was an acknowledgement that yet another corporate giant had been seduced and set back by the tantalizing prospect of unremitting growth. They're realizing that growth for growth's sake is not working for them, Brian Modoff, a Deutsche Bank securities analyst, said after Chambers issued a memo calling for more internal discipline at Cisco. Starbucks, of course, succumbed to the same siren song. Growth became a virus inside the company, the coffee chain's founder and CEO Howard Schultz declared recently, as he described his efforts to recapture the spirit that Starbucks had when it was less expansive. And Toyota similarly lost its way, a subject that I first explored back in 2007 when I suggested that Peter Drucker would have strongly advised the car maker to start rededicating itself to quality over quantity. There are few exceptions to the rule that today's growth company is tomorrow's problem, Drucker wrote in his 1973 classic, Management, Tasks, Responsibilities, Practices. Given these cautionary examples and Drucker's feelings on the matter, I was a bit surprised by the latest CEO survey from the Conference Board, which revealed business growth to be the #1 challenge that executives say they're looking to tackle. Companies are revving their engines for growth, the Conference Board noted in its accompanying research report. For the more than 700 CEOs polled, it's all about reorienting their organizations toward growth after years of hunkering down to combat the effects of the global recession and, in some cases, to fight for survival, the report said. Customer relationships, something that Drucker always put front and center, came in at number 7 on the list. Innovation, which Drucker believed was the lifeblood of every organization, ranked just 4th. Rounding out the top 10 challenges that the CEOs identified were talent, cost optimization, government regulation, corporate brand and reputation, sustainability, international expansion, and investor relations. And yet, as worrisome as this may seem on its face, it's crucial to understand that Drucker wasn't anti-growth. Growth, he wrote, will continue to be a desirable and indeed a necessary business objective. Without sufficient growth, after all, it can become impossible for a company to bring in skilled employees looking for opportunity and excitement. Once a company ceases to attract and to hold competent people, dry rot has set in, Drucker warned in The Frontiers of Management. The key is to ensure that the growth is healthy. To achieve this, a management needs a rational growth policy, Drucker explained. A management needs objectives that are based on more solid grounds than the desire to grow or the promise to grow. The process begins with a question, according to Drucker. What is the minimum growth the company requires, without which it would actually lose strength, vigor, and the ability to perform, if not to survive? The answer, he said, should tie into the growth rate of the market or markets in which the enterprise competes. A company needs viable market standing, Drucker wrote, otherwise it soon becomes marginal. It becomes the wrong size. It may eventually become extinct. Another consideration. Growth in volume is, in and of itself, pointless. To use up more wood each year may be a rational objective for the gypsy moth, Drucker wrote, but it's an inane objective for a paper company. The standard, instead, must be economic performance, as measured by contribution to economy and society, by productivity of resources, and by profitability. After a company decides on its minimum growth requirement, the next question to ask is, what is the optimum level of growth? Or, as Drucker put it, what is the combination of activities, products, and businesses that promises to produce the best balance between risk and return on resources? It is this optimum point, rather than a maximum, which determines the upper range of a company's growth goals, Drucker asserted. Given the importance of this balance, the ideal way to grow is often to shrink first, shedding those products and processes that aren't delivering the desired results. A business actually grows if it sloughs off activities which do not contribute, Drucker wrote. Such activities only drain. They impede the true growth potential. Cisco, for one, seems to be taking this path. In the wake of Chambers' admission, the company announced that it would stop making the popular flip camcorder as part of a bid to concentrate on its core businesses. Drucker would surely have praised the move. As technology evolves, it creates more and more diversified products with different markets, as well as different objectives for innovation, Drucker wrote in his 1954 landmark, The Practice of Management. The point is finally reached where top management cannot know or understand what the diversified businesses require or even what they are. The point may be reached where objectives that fit one business or group of businesses endanger another. In his memo, Chambers sought to reassure his employees by saying, "We understand that our customers want to stay and grow with Cisco." Underlying that vision seems to be a very Drucker-like insight learned the hard way. Growth is vital, but only smart growth is sustainable.
A version of that essay first appeared in The Drucker Difference, a bi-weekly column for Bloomberg Businessweek.com. Drucker on the Dial is brought to you today by the Drucker Business Forum, a speaker series produced by the Peter F. Drucker and Masatoshi Ito Graduate School of Management at Claremont Graduate University, with additional support from the Pearson Foundation. The series is co-presented by 89.3 KPCC, Southern California Public Radio. Thank you for tuning in to Drucker on the Dial. As always, you can follow our ongoing conversation about leadership and management at our daily blog, The Drucker Exchange, at thedx.org, thedx.org.